Well, Mountaineer Nation, it is week 13, but unfortunately, we don't have a West Virginia game to break down this week, so no preview show. We'll have the last one of the regular season next week, this time when West Virginia battles Texas Tech on Senior Day at home. So instead, I'm going to do an exercise that has been weeks in the making, has been a lot of debate. Let me tell you, I was privileged during my lunch break today to listen to Mike Kazaza and Chris Anderson of 2-4 Sports do a very similar show like this. So I'm glad they're thinking in the same vein that I have been for the last few weeks. It really kind of spawned just before, I think, the Colorado game is when head coach Rich Rodriguez that said they are going to use the bye week, which is this week now, to do complete evaluations of the roster. I'm sure they're pulling in general manager Chuck Lilly and the recruiting general manager roster management staff, all parties who play a role in that. I'm wondering if someone from Gold Blue Enterprises is taking a role in this, and let's just kind of set the scene for you. So starting December 3rd, that's the first day of the early signing period, December 3rd through the 5th for high school students. Or high school prospects. And right as of today, West Virginia has 29 committed. And you heard over the last several weeks, Coach Rodriguez saying that West Virginia would like to get somewhere over 30, maybe upwards of 35 freshman commits for the 2026 class. West Virginia has lost a few and added a few over these last several weeks, and you think things might change there in that regard with this weekend and next weekend being two more visit opportunities during the regular season and then prior to that early signing day. So just seems like it gets earlier and earlier. Now it's December 3rd. Does happen once again on February 4th of 2026, but as we've seen over the course of the last several years, especially I think it's ramped up post-COVID, is that these high school players make their commitments over the course of the summer. If there are different coaching changes, as we've seen at Penn State, Virginia Tech, UCLA, LSU, all at Florida, all over the country, then there are some recruits who kind of reevaluate their standing, decommit. So there's always that factor. But no longer does it seem like the biggest fish, over 90% it seems like sign by the early signing day. So, and as we've seen over the last, several years since the early signing day came to be, that's just the case. Is that West Virginia might bring in, 2 or 3 on the late signing day. Vast majority of their class. And then the transfer portal opens on January 2nd and is open for 2 weeks. And the change this year in comparison to the last 4 years since the transfer portal became a thing after the 2020 season is that there's only going to be one period. There's not going to be a spring period like previous years. There is just 1 2-week period for players to drop out, or to enter the portal, and then you can entertain recruits for however long that you want in the recruiting process, but this thing goes warp speed. Once players enter the portal, if there already hasn't been some behind-the-scenes tomfoolery and poaching and tampering, these players, they get their offers. Sometimes in less than a week, they're setting up official visits, and they might sign within the 2-week portal period. So once we turn the page into 2026, it is going to be loco. And what I want to do with this video is to prepare Mountaineer Nation mentally here, because I think we are in for another not complete, but I think we are in for a large overhaul to the West Virginia football roster. I think that is just kind of the way of the world now, and with how cutthroat and competitive that Coach Rodriguez is, and it seems as if there's kind of a new strategy being taken that is so different from the old regime under head coach Neil Brown. I think we're finally settled into a place where West Virginia is trying to compete from a roster management standpoint with we've seen the investments from the university itself to the athletic department. They want to be one of the power players in the Big 12 conference. So 2025 was kind of a setting of a foundation, trying for Coach Rodriguez and all of the assistant coaches to kind of understand who's worth the damn on the team currently. They brought in an influx of so many one-year players, and now they have to backfill that, it seems like, with a large incoming freshman class. This will be a smaller, I feel like, transfer portal class than last year's. That we won't see that kind of big. But what I think West Virginia is going to have to do is going to get more quality because of what's now come down the pike in the last year with the house settlement rev share component. So I don't want to belabor the point too much. I kind of want to meet in the middle because there are some people who are very knowledgeable on this topic, like listened to or once talked over the summer with my guy Justin Coos Walker of Coos' Corner about this, and like I don't understand some of the nuances to it, like a new fiscal year, because like the college that I work here for the new fiscal year starts July 1. So how does it work in like a full recruiting calendar cycle? Is West Virginia using its budget for player salaries that's dating back to the beginning of, January 1st of 2025? Like, it's kind of messy. It's kind of convoluted, not fully understanding it. And in so much of this is wrapped up into secrecy. So because of the house settlement, WVU Athletics, I say WVU Athletics because this spans not only the football team, the basketball team, but all of West Virginia sports, has $20.5 million to share with its student athletes. So essentially that is now the payroll for WVU Athletics. And because of the memorandum and changing of the guard from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, that does not have to be shared equally like you have with Title IX in athletic scholarships and opportunities and things like that. So West Virginia, as sounds like, has become public knowledge according to Ren Baker, and I know that's been heavily talked about on the Three Guys Before the Game podcast, is that somewhere in the ballpark of 66 to 75% or higher, we don't know this information, will be allocated toward football. The rest will be, or then the large percentage will be allocated toward men's basketball. And then, of course, all of the Olympic sports, women's sports included in that, just because it's kind of proportional to the way that revenue is generated for the athletic department. That's not innocent. Like you might have some schools, like take Villanova, who might use all of their $20.5 million on basketball between men's and women's because they're a basketball school. And that's what they want to put their money and resources in. Or take a school like Coastal Carolina, who might want to just invest it all into baseball as a national power in baseball. Like, it is your prerogative as a university, as a college, how you want to go and use that. But that's, it sounds like, has been kind of the narrative as we've gone into the last, or probably the last 12 to 18 months, has this been heavily debated and heavily talked about. Now, what is not, and this is the dark webs, this is the craziness of college sports in the year of a good Lord's year of 2025, is that, so yes, the House settlement then reined in some of the big boys from the SEC and Big Ten who were getting the large media rights deal payouts from Fox Sports and ESPN. And as we know, the Big 12, the ACC, and all of the G6 are making smaller, half or less than what those two conferences are. So those, as now having that kind of payroll salary cap in place, everybody, quote unquote, is playing on the same playing field, which we know there will be schools. There's no excuse for anyone in the Big Ten and the SEC, but then there will be those, I'm sure, in the Big 12, I'm sure in the ACC, and same with the G6, that will not be able to fund their athletic rev share operation up to $20.5 million. Athletic director Ren Baker said West Virginia will do so. and that will be an annual thing. And I think that's the only thing that was saving West Virginia, to keep up in the world of college sports, because it doesn't have the kind of money in its NIL war chest that take a school like Oregon that's funded by Phil Knight, or Michigan is by the CEO, founder of Oracle, or take what Texas A&M pays, et cetera, who have kind of been those, and even like say a Texas Tech this past year, who with Cody Campbell's oil money then invested that into the football team, and you see the dividends paid. Now, what's the dark back world of college football is these over-the-cap NIL deals. You might be asking yourself, Carson, what the heck is that? Well, this is where it almost becomes like a Breaking Bad money laundering kind of operation is what I see it as. Is that you can't, like a public, so that now because of the created out of the House settlement is the College Sports Commission, CSC, that was kind of the enforcement arm coming out of the NCAA because the NCAA went so hands off on this. So the CSC is supposed to enforce anybody who's making an NIL deal that's over $600. I said a long time ago, $600 is pennies in the world of college sports these days. Should have been somewhere in the ballpark of around $10,000, I feel like, or more. But that's where they've stood. And now even the CSC sent out a memorandum earlier this week to all of, I think, Division I schools, basically trying to get their sign on, their signature that, hey, we know that things are about to go crazy once the transfer portal opens in football recruiting. You've agreed to this because of the House settlement. You know, coaches have been very public across the country on this note of wanting to try and have, the guidelines, as they always use the term, even though some states versus others have legislation within their state that say that the CSC cannot sue them over these kinds of violations. So until there's federal legislation around this, it's only time will tell whether the CSC actually has teeth, if they can bite, and will they go after some of these bad acting schools out there. So like a Texas Tech, what the way they're trying to do it is go after collectives for one, and anyone who has what I would consider is like a public figure, if you want to call it that, or however, like a Cody Campbell can't be as public as he previously had in saying, I'm just going to pay this player an NIL money. If it has to be passed by the CSC, and I'm wondering if they've come up with a blacklist or they've kind of tried to like do their own investigative research. Now, it's not a foolproof system. Here's the thing. So like, here's the example is what I'm saying. It's kind of like a money laundering, Breaking Bad kind of situation is, and this is what was talked about in an article, I think it was over the summer of 2024, as everything was coming around with the House settlement, is the new battlefield across college football would be these over-the-cap NIL deals, and how, I think it was like the athletic director at Ohio State was quoted throughout this article. I'm going to try and find it if I can link it in my description of my video. But take a private citizen like myself, or let's take my dad. So Kerry Fox wants to make $1 million NIL deal, but he's a WVU alum, trying to do that kind of thing through the College Sports Commission. Like, if there's no sort of actual business reason for the deal, then the CSC, if it's over $600, technically should be shutting those things down. So that's why you don't have bad actors like a Dave Portnoy from Barstool going out there and spending $1 million or however much it took to get Bryce Underwood this past year. Like, that's supposed to curb those things. But there's nothing taking away from, again, take my dad, Kerry Fox, and him giving $1 million somehow to, let's say, American Eagle, which has its headquarters here in Pittsburgh. And American Eagle going out there like they did with Drew Aller this past season, Jeremiah Smith, been to the mall. I've seen their ads on the wall, and have an NIL deal that comes from a legitimate business, American Eagle, and go out there and we're going to take ads. We're going to put you in jeans commercials like Sydney Sweeney, all of those kinds of things. That is totally legitimate. And that is what schools across the country are now trying to figure out with business. And this is everybody. So if they can launder, so like the most powerful people, it feels like that's why the role of an athletic director, in my opinion, has changed so much over the course of the last handful of years. Is whoever has the most connections, it seems like, to Fortune 500 companies and $1 billion companies out there who can then market their and connections to alumni and all of these different things, who can have players then be marketed to these companies. But say these companies are like, you know what, to have so-and-so on the team, let's take Cam Vaughn, to have Cam Vaughn be out there, we don't necessarily want to do any sort of a business. But if the money is fronted by someone with a collective through another business to the athlete, it all circles through the CSC. They write up the deal and things like that. That's what's going to have to be caught. And I don't know how they do that. I truly don't. I don't know how they. And then the other thing is just the enforcement. So again, if these states who have NIL restrictive laws and lawsuits, like what kind of enforcement can the CSC really bring about? And that's what's going to be interesting. And that's what I'm wondering for this exercise that I'm taking is West Virginia, with some of its athletes, paying above the cap NIL deals to them, or is there some sort of NIL component as part of what these players are ultimately taking home for pay? I hate that it becomes this gross, it's this professionalized, but this is the world of college football that unfortunately, because of the name, image, and likeness that came about in 2020, this is the way things are nowadays, is that NIL is used as a scapegoat for pay for play. And I mean, whether you agree with it at the end of the day that college athletes should be paid or not, it's a moot point at this point in time. So it's happening. So it's either you keep up, you continually fundraise to perpetuate the revenue share through 501c3 tax deductible donations. You fundraise that to be able to revenue share it through the athletes, and then you work behind the scenes to get NIL deals. So like, for example, the earlier commitment this week, Kevin Brown, I feel like will be a poster child for that American Eagle example. Like if Ren Baker is not setting up some sort of a meeting with the vice president of marketing and advertising or whatever with American Eagle or whatever business it is out there and saying, hey, we want to put this kid on, get him in your ads or something like that. That is what is so important, I feel like, in addition to so many of the different other roles an athletic director faces, or the CEO of Gold Blue Enterprises, things like that. It's just like, who has the most connections to these businesses? And then if the businesses are kind of like, are they willing to play ball? Are they willing to play the game as it's probably happening at other places across the country? So I'm going to do more investigative research on this on my own time. The other thing that I will say is the only piece of hard evidence that I have seen was an article this past summer written, let me check the link here, who it was written by. It was on ESPN.com, and this is how I based it. So it was Max Olson of The Athletic, published on August 24th, and the headline is College Football 2025. How much does each position cost? So throughout so much of 2020 up until that point in time, we had no idea. I mean, you had heard speculation that Arch Manning was getting this kind of NIL deal. You can go back all the way to the Jordan Addison days, and he was, given a house by USC and XYZ to transfer from Pitt. So that article right there gives kind of a variance or, a floor and a ceiling for what it would cost for a starting caliber Power 4 starter at quarterbacks, or at positions quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, offensive tackle versus interior lineman, edge rusher on defensively, defensive tackle, linebacker, cornerback, and safety. So I'll also put that link in the description here. So that is what I kind of used to generate this. And I got to tell y'all that it was hard to try and fit these kinds of players, the players on West Virginia's roster, into a point where you could kind of consider how much players that you want to retain are going to cost. What about if there are players that you would like to keep to fill out your roster, but not necessarily pay? Would a full scholarship be enough that they're not getting any sort of the revenue sharing? How much are you paying the high school commits? Because if you're competing against everybody in the country for those high school players, but you don't want to pay them so much so that it breaks your $20.5 million, because for the most part, like, take a look at this year, how many true freshmen have actually played on this team? Not many at all. And then leaving enough room in the budget that come January 2nd, when the transfer portals opens and you can officially, call it free agency opens, that West Virginia has enough also that it can go out there and make competitive offers to players at different positions. And I see that West Virginia is going to have to take in about 16 high-quality players out of the transfer portal. I don't think that, it doesn't make sense. I guess it did this past offseason, given all of the attrition that West Virginia had from the Neil Brown recruited players, all the players who were graduating, going off to the NIL, NFL, etc. That West Virginia took the Johnny Majors type of approach, that they were going to flood their roster full of players, see what sticks, see who can play, who can't play. One thing, I would love to know if the West Virginia media could ask Coach Rodriguez, because I know he did say this, I think, when West Virginia was really struggling in the middle of the season, that we've misevaluated on some guys. If he and the roster management staff would have done it differently a little bit last year and not going for so many one-year guys. You got to get a guy like a Michael Coates in there because you need a cornerback one, but he's only got 1 year of eligibility. And then you bring in Jason Chambers, and he's the same way. Your whole entire starting secondary is all seniors. Your 2 middle linebackers who have played the most this season, seniors. Your defensive line, you have a lot of Jamori Robinson, Eddie Kelly, Eddie Vesterinen on the defensive line. West Virginia is going to be better from you had a young, quote-unquote, offense this year. The component with that's going to be interesting to follow is, I've heard this debate from time to time, is do you, with professional athletes, do you pay players for past success or for future results? And that's what's so curious, I feel like, when trying to do this. Understanding that West Virginia has a lot of underclassmen, younger guys, or unproven who got their first shot at starting this year, playing major roles and getting snaps, and for some really struggled, and then some really blossomed. So when getting into this now, 23 minutes in, I feel as if West Virginia has about 24 players on the current roster that you would like to keep but will need to pay. And whenever I did this exercise, I thought somewhere in the ballpark of, again, using the figures that ESPN provided for 2025, what are players costing, that somewhere in the ballpark of around $5.3 million is what it would take for the 24 players that I feel like that you would want to keep from last year's squad to next year's squad. That's what it's going to cost. So again, take that out of that $20.5 million and you think to yourself, okay, $5.3 million. If West Virginia is going to have somewhere, again, between $12 and $15 million to use as part of this rev share, that's not considering the NIL, component that I already kind of talked about, that's shady business. Okay. But then I'm like, oh my goodness, there are 25 guys that I would really like to keep and give them another year's worth of chance, because a lot of them are, having a redshirt year, or were stuck behind seniors who've gotten a majority of the snaps this year, who just, didn't really get the opportunity to get onto the field. But I don't want to have to pay him. That's the thing. Like, would a full scholarship suffice? Take a guy like Cooper Young, who has not played much at all, and he's going into his 4th year in a WVU uniform. Or a guy like Josh Isosa, when Walter Young-Bear was really struggling, thought that he would get some playing time. He hasn't. Or a couple of recruits from last year's class that were some kind of higher caliber recruits, but haven't done anything this year, just redshirted, in Wilnerson Telemock and Brandon Caesar. Or some guys like West Virginia brought over in the transfer portal over the summer, like Caleb Newey-Yandel at linebacker. Caleb Gray, who was a JUCO prospect, who's the most senior, and he'll be a redshirt junior safety, and hasn't played at all. Or a guy like Zay Jennings, who, man, was really high hopes on for like the 2024 spring game, but hasn't played for 2 seasons really. So it's very, like, that whole component. So that 25 players that I'd like to keep but not play, 24 players that I'd like to keep but you're going to have to pay, I feel like. The high school commits, if you're not paying them at all, which I don't know what they're doing, because again, how many of the incoming recruits next year are going to actually see playing time immediately? Now, like Kevin Brown, as I said on my video earlier this week, apparently was being offered in the ballpark of around $800,000 by Penn State before he decommitted. So if West Virginia is paying around that much, that is a huge chunk right there that's toward your overall team salary. So I could be totally off in this regard. And then I see, again, 16 different players that at the end of the day, West Virginia is going to have to go get. A second string or third string quarterback if Scotty Fox is your guy for the future. Another big running back. I'm assuming if West Virginia is going to try and retain and pay Jaheim White, Dior Hubbard, and Sincere Bowers, and if Curtis Jones is going to be this player who's tried out at multiple positions on offense and defense, I still think you need another big body guy because you're bringing in 2 smaller recruits in Chris Talley and Sir Paul Jesus and Cleats Cheeks, who is suffering through a torn ACL injury, so might not even be ready for the start of the regular season. And you got to have depth at running back in Coach Rodriguez's system, as we've learned this year. Quarterback, too. As we've seen, they take a lot of hits, those guys, but if you think you're going to have improved offensive line play, I also think a receiving tight end. If Ryan Ward is going to be your one guy that you're trusting in that line tight end room to start, I think you got to have another Grayson Barnes type of player. And I know there's been a lot of talk over the last several weeks about, hey, well, Grayson Barnes played JUCO ball, maybe he has extra eligibility. I'm not basing it on that. I don't know if this staff can afford to do what they did last year and hope that these players, come Labor Day, get a waiver, because we saw how that kind of impacted the slow starts for Jamori Robinson for sure, Jeff Weimer. So I like to go out and get another tight end to pair with Ryan Ward. I think you got to get a possession wide receiver too. If Cam Vaughn is going to be your wide receiver 1, and he might be behind Scotty Fox, probably the highest paid offensive player for next season, I still think that you're going to need some sort of possession wide receiver 2, because I really thought that this could be a breakout year for Rodney Gallagher. And going into now what would be his senior year next year, so 1 year's worth of eligibility left, I just don't know if Rodney is going to have the kind of if he is what he is at this point, or is he ever going to try and be like, a poor man's Darius Raynaud, or I don't even know who else I can kind of compare him to at his size speed combination. So Christian Hamilton's looked really good these last few weeks. I think he's a really good blocking wide receiver. And then we know how much of a precedence that's put on. So I feel good about 3 receivers kind of there in that ballpark. So I think you need to add a 4th quality wide receiver. And then you can kind of deal with some of the freshmen and some of the other guys that I haven't yet to really talk about. But then I think another premium addition, offensive, maybe your number 1 premium addition now that you've gotten Kevin Brown at right tackle, is going out there and getting a right guard. West Virginia is pretty thin or unproven commodities there at the guard position. Jude Edwards was brought in August to be a center. Robbie Martin was one from last offseason. We've yet to see either of those 2 guys this year. Isosa's I already mentioned, Brandon Homedy, Phillip Bowser. And I'm already assuming that West Virginia is going to have to pay Nick Cray, Landon Livingston, Malik Agbo, and Donovan Haslam. Those are really the 4 guys I feel like with eligibility for next year who have contributed. So you got to go out there, I feel like, and get a right guard. And either Haslam could move over to right guard and you kind of pair one of the transfer guys in between Livingston and Cray for next year's offensive line. And then I kind of like that offensive line. I think that would be night and day better than what we saw against Ohio week 2. But I think West Virginia is going to have to invest at that position in interior offensive linemen. And there might be a guy available that used to be in a Mountaineer uniform that's played this season at Virginia Tech. Who knows? On the defensive side, this is where there's going to have to be heavy investment on this side of the ball, just like there was from a total volume standpoint this past year. But and West Virginia did, I think, in Fred Perry, in Michael Coates, in Jamori Robinson, even though he didn't necessarily pan out as much as you thought he would. Chase Wilson, you're just losing a lot on the defensive side of the ball. So I still think that West Virginia needs to bring in a starting defensive end. At this point in time, he shows flashes. He really does, but I don't think he'll be a bona fide kind of starter that's going to put fear in opposing offenses, and that's Asani Redwood. He'll be a 5th-year redshirt senior, and then next to him, I like Corey McIntyre. I'm so happy for Corey McIntyre. After the catastrophic knee injury that he suffered right before the spring game in 2024, to come back finally to full health, it seems like, after missing all of last season, that tandem with he and Nate Gabriel, I think, have been really, really good. But are those guys going to be your starters next year? Are they going to be that good? I don't know. So I'd like to have another defensive end, in the same fashion that I feel like West Virginia's had Eddie Kelly and also rotating in Devin Grant. I'd like to have an Eddie Kelly type player. If Redwood's going to be on the opposite side and you're trying to either go down to a 4-man front or a 3-man front and kind of have a rotating second level that you rotate in about 6 guys. I also think that West Virginia has to get another defensive tackle. I actually do think he's a player you're going to probably have to pay in NIL commitments. He was a 4-star prospect, and I was really, really high on him. But I just think he's young. He's a true freshman. You don't always have to count on true freshmen. You can let them redshirt. That's what the best programs can kind of do out there. But I would have thought it may be a 3 technique. He would get onto the field more than he has, and that's Taylor Brown. So I think if you're going to count at defensive tackle for Corey McIntyre and Nate Gabriel, maybe Taylor Brown steps up, I think you got to go get one more rotational defensive tackle. I also think you need a rotational bandit. I don't know if I've seen so much so just yet that I'm like, yes, every down defensive or, every play defensively. Because I also like him at running back as Curtis Jones. I really think that he has some promise there with a whole offseason worth to train at that position. And I love his size. And I love that he played running back in high school, so it's not going to be as much of a learning curve as it was for C.J. Donaldson. So Curtis Jones, could he be that guy? But we're also Marshawn Oxley's kind of been rotating in at that position. Braden Siders being there as well. So I hope West Virginia wouldn't have to pay Oxley. That you could have a rotation of Jones, Oxley, and someone that you bring in from the transfer portal. But you might have to pay kind of starters money or more than what you're paying some of the guys that you can get on the offensive side of the ball who are backups, because edge rusher is such a premium position, it seems like, just like the NFL. Then West Virginia, unfortunately, is going to have to go get 3 starting safeties. I just don't trust anybody who's returning in that safety position. I know Chris Filippo's got onto the field. That's great as a true freshman, a little bit here and there this season. Haven't seen anything out of Zay Jennings. Haven't seen anything out of Caleb Gray. It's been all of the guys who are the seniors. So if you have to get a nickel safety kind of thumper like Fred Perry, I think you're going to have to pay the highest of the high market value to kind of go get one of those kind of caliber of players. You can't be on the cheap. Now, do you not have to pay the highest end of fair market value for the other 2 starting safeties? I don't think so. I think that what West Virginia has done so far this season at the safety position, mixing different players in and out this season. Like I'm thinking Jordan Walker, who unfortunately suffered a broken arm. What was it, the TCU game or something like out there? Of course, Fred Perry. Kokora Tarnu was a returner. Derek Carter Jr. is in his last year of eligibility. Darian Lewis from Akron. The only guy really at that safety position who, with returning eligibility, that I feel like West Virginia should throw some money some way is Jacob Boyce. And I was really, really 50-50 on that, because I haven't seen, he's been involved in on plays, but so much so that he's any sort of a playmaker, game breaker. Now, could West Virginia move Nick Taylor over to safety, as they've kind of done this season, who I think is kind of more of a natural corner? Yes, you could do that, but then you need even more help at cornerback. You hear what I'm saying? So if West Virginia is going to invest, they're going to have to do it in all 5 starting secondary positions: 3 safeties, 2 corners. Because I don't know if I'd necessarily trust Nick Taylor to be a wide cornerback 1 like I do Michael Coates. You could have him at cornerback 2, but he's been a little bit up and down this season. I've really liked him at times, and then a little bit inconsistent or trying to do his own thing out there at times. So, Dwayne Galloway has yet to get onto the field. He was at one point in time a 4-star recruit. He's a true freshman out there. Are you looking at Taylor and looking at Galloway as your 2 starting corners? I don't know if I trust that going into 2026 if I'm West Virginia and I can afford to go out there and spend to get starters. And then also, you hate to say it, but West Virginia's in the market for both of its special teamers that it needs. Ollie Straw, out of his eligibility, a 4-year starter. Unfortunately, the hometown stud, number 1 punter in the nation recruit, Jimmy Gregg, passed on you this past summer, chose Syracuse over West Virginia. Now, could you go back to him and say, hey, we really want you, you're offered a starting position, all those things? But I don't know what's necessarily changed from then till now. I mean, Syracuse is horrible, but for punters, maybe that's a good thing. For West Virginia, does he want to just get out of Morgantown? I don't know his story. And then starting kicker, Cade Hensley, was only a 1-year guy. So if you got to go out there and get all of these 16 positions that I've just mentioned, I think that's somewhere in the ballpark of $5.7 million. So $5.7 million to use in the transfer portal. I'm saying 5.3 on players who have eligibility returning for next year that you have to go use. Do the math right there. That's $11 million between the two. If you've paid Kevin Brown apparently, upwards of $800,000 or more, that $12 million goes through quick. So are you going to take away from basketball? Are you going to take away from baseball? Are you going to try and do the NIL kind of thing that way for those Olympic sports and use the rev share solely on football and you can just see how this goes quick. And that is, again, considering I don't know of any other, no one knows this information. How much are the true freshman getting paid? Is it coming in at like a base value of like $25,000 or something like that? So $25,000 multiplied by 28, you see how this adds up really, really quick. So West Virginia is going to have to win some battles. And it's crazy that they have to do the whole team, because this is the way that, college football unfortunately works, that everybody's on 1-year NIL deals or, just 1-year deals. So everyone can potentially become a free agent. And the timing of this too. Does this happen right after the end of the once the final whistle is blown next Saturday against Texas Tech, is the following week? Which I don't know if they have finals that week or it's the next week. Is the agents of all of these players sitting down with general manager Chuck Lilly and any assistants that he has? I don't know if head coach Rich Rodriguez is there or anyone else on the coaching staff and saying, "Hey, this is our offer to you for 2026. Do we have a commitment from you for next season?" And are they doing the same kind of like spreadsheeting that I'm doing over here? And if $500,000 to Jaheim White is acceptable, and that's the offer West Virginia makes. This is all hypothetically speaking here. Is that something acceptable? Pencil them in, or do you have to do some sort of negotiating? So I feel as if the team across the board is going to have to put up some, kind of a low ball effort, low ball offers to start, with some players that you think like, oh man, take a guy like Landon Livingston. I think he's maybe a great example. Went as a team captain to this past year's, he was their Big 12 Media Day representative, first year starter. He's going into his last year's worth of eligibility. Landon's been okay this year. PFF grades, he missed some time due to injury at some point in time, so didn't play a full season. He's got better as the year's gone all around, but is he a Zach Frazier type? No. So if, according to this ESPN article, a guard or center is paid anywhere between $300,000 and $700,000, can you afford to make an offer to Landon Livingston at, say, $400,000? Or is he going to try and test the waters elsewhere? This is what's the interesting component to our players. If you see kind of the light, the bigger, if they like the environment there, they think they can see writing on the wall that this team, you got a starting position at a Power 4 school. You think that this team is going to contend for a conference championship. You're getting that kind of development. If you have any sort of professional pursuits, you buy in. And then you might say, you know what, I might be able to get, $50,000 more or somewhere else at a lesser school or something like that, who's willing to pretty much overpay for me or something like that. I'm going to accept this and take that. I think that's where West Virginia is still getting there. Our school, some players at some schools taking lesser money because of all of those things that I just talked about. That's what West Virginia wasn't getting under Neil Brown. So West Virginia, with the fewer resources than it had then, I think West Virginia has today to play with, it was so hard to build any sort of a roster because you couldn't, once you set the floor for a player, it's only going to go up exponentially over the years. And you're kind of playing, a risk if you're going to offer someone money less than what they took the year before. So I'll go back to the player I talked about a little bit earlier, in Rodney Gallagher. I don't know what the previous regime was paying him in NIL dollars, but I know he was kind of a social media phenom coming out of high school, 4-star U.S. Army All-American bowl game. What was Rodney Gallagher making as a freshman? What will you offer him now as a senior? Or vice versa, if you're thinking Kevin Brown's now coming in at $800,000 or more, and he plays like a Big 12 caliber player, are you going to have to pay him next year $200,000 more? This is where it gets very interesting. And then, is there any sort of infighting? I feel like between players, especially the ones of the older upperclassmen, the old guard versus the new guard. Like, if Landon Livingston, to use my example, is only getting $400,000, but Kevin Brown's getting $900,000, he's a redshirt senior versus a true freshman. Is there any sort of kind of animosity there? Is that even information, unless Kevin Brown comes out and says in the locker room how much West Virginia is paying him versus how much Landon Livingston says he's getting paid? You know what? Like, that's the kind of thing that we have yet to experience because West Virginia hasn't been good enough since 2020 under Neil Brown to be able to get to that point in time. And you saw how some of the, like, me first players, when the new staff was coming in, take it as Hudson Clements, number one, offered X, Illinois offered more, he was out the door. So are there players on this team who are kind of going to go into those kind of negotiations back with WVU? That's, I think, going to be, we'll never know this. Well, unfortunately, never. I would love to be a fly on the wall in the Pushkar Center when all of this is happening. Truly, I love this. I live for this. But I don't know what it's going to look like. But West Virginia is going to have to know, if they're going to bring in this class of 29 or more on early signing day, which is the Monday, Tuesday, right after their last game, as they're negotiating with their current players. They already have these deals set in place, which I don't know what the money is for some of these high school commits. And then what are they going to have in leftover rev share money to go out there when January 2nd comes to go, I'm telling you, guns blazing in the transfer portal to get those players that you need. If that's the case, and West Virginia is able to go out there and retain who I have on my list here, if the players who I'm saying you would like to not have to pay as part of the rev share but would accept a full scholarship, that's great to keep them. And then the high school commits and go get 16 high-quality transfer players. That's somewhere in the ballpark of 90-some players for this roster. Now, I know that you can have upwards of 110, but do you really need those 110? Unless you can get guys who would accept a full scholarship, because West Virginia has more scholarships to play with now. And would come in for the full scholarship, Division I, Power 4 experience, but you wouldn't have to necessarily pay. This is a very interesting new way of doing things, and it's going to go up next year, 4%. So this is the way I feel like until super conferences form in 2023 to 2030 to 2031, and we get the formation of the new Division I, that West Virginia is going to have to perpetually keep up with everybody else. And there will be some schools, I'm telling you, that can't, and are going to fall by the wayside. Like, look what's happening already this year to Oklahoma State. A once, extremely proud program, by the numbers are, right up there with Utah as the best Big 12 schools of the last 25 years. And are they going to be able to perpetually raise $20.5 million to then pay the players and do it again and do it again and do it again? So I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the donors that West Virginia does have. I'm thankful for a wonderful fan base that we have. I record these videos for folks like yourself, that there is now, I feel like, a formula. West Virginia I'm sure the coaching staff is understanding who they'd like to keep. Does it match up exactly with what I'm talking about here? That's to be seen. Like, I'm seeing that West Virginia is bringing in a JUCO running back, I think this week this weekend on an official visit. Martavius, he said some sort of JUCO. Anyway, I forget his last name at the top of my head. Do you need another 5'10", 170-pound running back? So it's going to be just fascinating how this roster is managed between now and January 16th when the transfer portal closes. And then we'll follow this, of course, all throughout the winter because I love this. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I do this each and every week and have a lot of fun doing it. If you've liked this video, please like it so more fans can see it across YouTube, and love to have you a subscriber to my channel. I'd love to know your feedback too. Good, bad, or indifferent. How you feeling about the roster management as we approach the end of the regular season? And would you, like me, love to be a fly on the wall of these conversations that are happening over the course of this week who West Virginia wants to keep, who it wants to cut, what positions are the highest of need. Can they fill those with high school players? Do they have to go out there and overspend on transfer portal players? What are you expecting for this offseason? I'm thinking it's going to be another chaotic offseason, but what say you? Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hail West Virginia. Let's go. Spot the ball.